Welcome to Tesseract Podcast, where we unlock your power to innovate. Hi, my name is Matt, and I'm going to be your host today. Tesseract's mission is to empower airmen, connect them to resources, and accelerate change across the Air Force logistics enterprise. Specifically, our team works as an innovation accelerator assigned to the Air Staff Logistics Directorate, where we partner with airmen to operationalize the new sustainment strategy. Lieutenant General Mike Dana, thank you so much for joining us today on Tesseract Podcast. We really appreciate it.
Hey, Matt, it's great to be here. Love your library.
No. Thank you. I know you're a huge reader. I will never forget when I met you at DCA, and I remember being so impressed because you had no idea I was a reader, and within the first 5 minutes, not even 5 minutes, you asked me, "What are you reading right now? Like, what's the best book you're reading right now?" And then you said, "Hey, these are the top 3 books that I recommend." And actually I have them sitting two of them here. I have it in this form.
Very good.
And then How to Think More Effectively.
Perfect. What else are you reading? I'll turn the question around. What else are you reading right now?
Oh, I'm reading Devotion.
Good, yeah.
That's been on my list for a long time. I'm a big Adam Makos fan. I think he's a great author.
Yeah.
And I want to read the book before I watch the movie. Because the movie just recently came out.
Yes. Yeah. Great.
And then, that's, and I recently finished, the Code War, on cyber conflict. So I'm trying to invest a lot of time into cyber war.
Good picks. And then with your grandfather being a Korean War veteran, I mean, Devotion, you'll love that. The movie's great because I'm part of the Marine Corps Scholarship Foundation, and Fred Smith, who was a Vietnam combat veteran Marine, he helped put that movie together, and I've heard it's absolutely fantastic. I've seen the preview; it looks really motivating.
Yeah, really, really good stuff.
Yeah.
It was resonating with me as well with Devotion because they're providing CAS in the Chosin Reservoir, right? So it's with the anniversary of the battle, now, right? I think it's timely.
And we talked this before, but I just think for the audience that if you really want a fantastic case study in the operational art, is looking at General O.P. Smith and the actions that he took to operationally and logistically prepare for that fight, because he knew there was a possibility that they would get overextended in that terrain and with the weather and the number of Chinese and the threat envelope. So I just think that the way he orchestrated that battle is really, to me, is a template for the future. And I don't think people recognize what a great battle that was in terms of our proficiency and on the Marine Corps proficiency, combined arms on the battlefield. But he brought it to a new level, in my opinion. The other thing with O.P. Smith is you really did appreciate logistics. I don't want to sound like the typical logistics guy that, hey, logistics doesn't get its due. Hey, I understand where we fit in, but we provide the foundation, we get the chessboard, the pieces set, and then support so the chess pieces can move, But I would just say that logistics is like oxygen, right? Because everybody every day is, this breathing thing is pretty good. But then when you don't have it, not good. So it's important, and again, in terms of the operational art, planning is, it's one of the warfighting functions, but it's one that, really needs a lot of attention so that you can action what you're trying to do, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. So why don't you enlighten the audience on your expertise in warfighting and logistics, talking about your background, you were in the Marine Corps for 37 years, right?
37. Yeah. I joke with the people that I work with. I'm the senior citizen on these various companies that I work with. So that's good. But I did do 37 years. I'm from upstate New York. I got commissioned in 82. Reason I went in the Marine Corps is I had an uncle that was a Marine, Roy Namor Kwajin in Peleliu, and he was my favorite uncle. I had 6 uncles in World War II, but he was absolutely the funniest. And there was nothing funny about his experience, but he was just a great role model. And I was fortunate enough, my first couple of years in the Marine Corps, I was an armor officer, M60A1 tanks. They're in museums now, by the way. But I was raised by the Vietnam generation, had the absolute utmost respect for the staff NCOs and officers that, put up with my mistakes and the things that I didn't do correctly when I was a young officer. But literally, my first three platoon sergeants, my first two company commanders were all Vietnam veterans. Battalion commander was a Silver Star recipient. I mean, it was just an amazing experience to be around, men like that that had really fought, tough battles in Vietnam and passed that expertise on. So I moved from tanks to logistics, did that for 32 years of my career, deployed 10 times. And really, my wife didn't like that, but I really enjoyed it. And still married, by the way, same wife, 32 years. But then after, working logistics, I think really the key jobs that I remember most fondly, besides, command in Afghanistan and Iraq, was being the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command J5, strategy and policy. Probably 60% of my time in that job focused on China and, the challenges that presents in that theater. But that was just a really great job. And I'm just not saying this because you're Air Force. I was surrounded by talent. I mean, when I walked in the room, I was definitely not the smartest guy. I mean, I was surrounded by just brilliant young officers that, carried the day. But that was just a fascinating theater to really dig into. And then I was fortunate enough to be moved to Washington, D.C. and become the head of logistics for the Marine Corps for 3 years and the director of the Marine Corps staff. I'd say the big things that the team just did a fantastic job when I was head of installation logistics is we had an initiative called Next Generation Logistics, that did its best to anticipate what a future conflict would look like and how we would logistically support that. And we put out different publications. The hybrid logistics brochure is probably the one that I'm most proud of that the team put together. I mean, I gave minimal guidance and they ran with it. And in fact, Rich Hicks, now no longer with the Marine Corps, but this is a young former corporal, thinking at the strategic level, laying out this document, but just talking about the different ways of how to support the future force. And I think the biggest challenge in supporting a future force is it's a blend. It's a blend of old and new. And that's what I call second industrial revolution military formations and fourth industrial revolutions. The second is, tanks and aircraft and big gas guzzlers, but throwing a lot of lead downrange. I mean, that's in order to generate effects, in that second industrial revolution, you really have to throw a lot of mobility and mass at the problem. Whereas I think in a fourth industrial revolution fight, especially with unmanned platforms, the space and cyber domains, there's going to be different aspects, a different way of war fighting that'll incorporate both of those. But at the end of the day, what do logisticians have to do? You've got to support the old one, the medium one, and then, the future force and everything in between. And I'll be honest, it's really hard, at least for me, to get my head around the complexity of the future battlefield, because we're going from a 3-domain fight, sea, air, and land. Sea had a very important subsea component, of course, but then with space and cyber. Because the thing that we had, and nothing you don't know, but in World War II and other conflicts, is we are literally, I think that the term we've come up with is a continental sanctuary in the United States. I mean, because we're always beyond reach of the enemy. Of course, we've been attacked with tragic results, on 9/11. But overall, we have been buffered, from the kind of pounding that, Japan and Germany took in World War II and other countries that we've been at war with. And I think in a future fight, we can no longer make that assumption. But I believe that, especially in the cyber realm, if you look at how you literally could turn the lights off, sewage treatment plants, all types of economic infrastructure, that will be very vulnerable to cyber. And we're going to have to learn how to fight through that. Because again, in World War II, factories unhindered were generating tons of mass. I mean, 303,000 aircraft, 2.4 million vehicles. I mean, we're gearing up that second industrial revolution machine, and it's all working. Well, in the future, we might not have that ability. And plus, with the new weapon systems that we have, I call them exquisite, and I mean that in a good way. I mean, there's just some incredible platforms out there, F-35 being an incredibly killing machine. But the problem is with exquisite platforms comes exquisite, at times, maintenance, supply web. And we're going to have to think through, okay, with these very high-end systems that perhaps are a little bit more sensitive and not as durable as, the old 2.5-ton truck or, literally an old Stewart tank. I'm really dating. I wasn't that old. I was never on those. But just to kind of thinking through how we're going to support both old and new capabilities at the same time. So that was a long preamble and answer to a short question. But back to you.
No, that's great, sir. I think, speaking of geography of warfare, I think the accidental superpower is a really good
Yeah.
read for our listeners to dive into. That talks about the concept of how geography has influenced growth of civilizations and
Yeah.
different different parts of the whether it's the Roman Empire, the
Yeah.
the German states, and now the United States. So
Yeah.
I just wanted to plug that there. I'm sure you've read it.
But no, that one I have, but another one that's kind of predates that. And I can't remember the author, but it's the role of the American frontier in America in the West. Think it's DeSoto. I'm not sure. Again, I'm getting old, 62. But that book just talks about how, as a nation, we're always looking, over the next hill, or the next horizon, and then when the expansion, is completed in the West in the late 1800s, then we start looking overseas, and it's how it impacts our psyche, because we're always looking to expand and explore, or explore and expand. So
Mhm.
that's a great book. Good rec.
Now, speaking of history and hindsight, I would like to talk a little bit about the American way of war, just for a minute here, because we mentioned that the Second Industrial Revolution, and you're also talking about the Fourth Industrial Revolution. Can you talk about what is threaded in our DNA when it comes to logistics and rapid mobility? Even if you want to even start back to the Civil War, right, and onward.
Yeah, I think, and I've given this pitch, and I'll just kind of walk through, mentally, some of the things I talked about in the past on this topic is we've always been good at strategic mobility, from getting from point A to point B. And again, if you look at the Civil War, there's this corps. It's called the 23rd Corps. It's fighting in Tennessee, and then literally within 19 days, this is 15,000 soldiers and all their kit and all their gear that gets moved all the way around for an amphibious, then of that day, amphibious assault on Wilmington, North Carolina. I mean, think about that. That's before the interstate highway system, before we had C-5s and C-17s. I mean, we're moving that many people, and we've always been that good at it. Same thing happens in World War One, because unrestricted submarine warfare, we enter World War One. Germans think it's going to take us 2 years to move 1 million men. We actually move 1 million the first year and 2 million by Armistice Day. So we're really good at projecting mass, and it's that mass conscript army, which I think, by the way, I'm jumping way ahead here. Is I am not sure that the current all volunteer military is the model of the future. And I say that because I'm not saying go back to World War One, World War Two. Everybody gets drafted, and it's the whole nation's mobilized that way. Though I think you could make an argument for that. But I think in the future, what we would look for is people like you, specifically, and others that are incredibly smart, either on cyber, space operations, um, any type of technology that's going to advance lethality and mobility for us. And that you literally say to this person, he or she, hey, you're gonna come into the United States Air Force for 2 years, and we're directing you to come, by the way, but we're really going to pay you well, okay? Because we're going to pay you what you would be making on the outside in your starter position. And then after you do your 2, 3 years in, either Space Force or any of these new emerging fields, then we're going to help you get a job, which we do that already, through various programs. But I just think that model of the conscript army, there was value to that back then, but I think we need a more selective conscript to be able to wage war with the complex systems that we have. Because when you go to that 5 domain fight that we have, what I'm concerned about, I'm saying this as a Marine, I think the decisive domains are going to be space and cyber. I mean, the Chinese aren't launching missiles at the cyclic rate because they're trying to replicate what NASA did. I mean, they're looking literally at the new high ground and saying, okay, how can we achieve competitive advantage in this domain? And if they're knocking down our satellites, if they're blinding us, we're going to need to be able to regenerate that capability, either at a lower altitude or higher altitude. But we're going to need that capability because everything we do today is so focused on command and control, and it's the C5 ISRT and all these capabilities because that's how you generate effects. Because in the old days, you generate effects by just throwing a lot of lead at it. Today, I think you can generate effects multiple different ways in all different domains. And then the simultaneity of that effects generation could literally either overwhelm the enemy or us, okay, or create delays and degradation in our capability. Yeah,
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, and especially looking at the PLA strategy of systems destruction warfare, right? And not all of that is kinetic. I mean,
correct.
it's most of that is driven by through the cyber domain, through the space domain. And I was talking with David Maxwell a few weeks ago, and we discussed unrestricted warfare and how
Yeah,
that's such an
19.
important text to dive into.
Yeah,
While that might not deliberately be the PLA's doctrine per se by definition, it certainly influenced thought, and
yes,
it's an outstanding playbook. Even though it's a couple of decades old now, but hey, the art
yeah,
of war is hundreds of years old and it's still
yeah,
relevant. But I would like to reemphasize that to our listeners is something to learn from that. It is going to be more than we get. Like, so let me take it from this angle here, and I think we see this in wargaming as well, where certain warfighters, depending on your MOS or AFSC, become biased in their domain of conflict, right? So if you have a grunt that is in a war game, right, whether it's an E5 or even a young captain who might be a like an 0302, might double down on the land domain. A
yeah,
pilot might emphasize the air domain, and so on and so forth. Because I think
yeah,
we favor we favor that where we need to holistically in that cognitive domain be able to understand and articulate all of these different types of threats and every and like we can get hit by in every at every angle. And actually I might be getting ahead of myself here because my next question is what you think the can you paint a picture of the future fight or what you believe the future fight's going to look like? But I'm getting attacked on my cell phone, right? I mean,
right.
like
Yeah,
it's coming from everywhere. It's not just
yeah,
on the battlefield, but I'll hand it back over to
yeah,
you and to paint that picture for us.
yeah. A lot to unpack there, but I would say that if you look at multi-domain, I mean, these are all the buzzwords, right? But there's actually substance to these. In a multi-domain, 5-domain fight, I think as you look at it, you need to look at it in a temporal way because certain domains at certain times will be more important than others. But I think the consistent thing is, the most important warfighting dimension is the human dimension, and specifically the human mind. And where I'm concerned is the current uh, Byzantine's too strong a word because I'll have to buy beer for my friends in the Pentagon. It's not Byzantine because the staff's got a lot of great people. There's a lot of smart folks at every level in different staffs, but it's almost designed in a 1960s second industrial revolution way. It's kind of like when I went to Catholic school. The nuns like, hey, you're going to memorize this. There's no critical thinking. Just read this, and that does have some value, but it doesn't prepare you for a very dynamic multi-domain fight because you need to be able to think at different levels at different times, and you need to be able to have a understanding of all the tools that you can leverage to create effects at the end of the day. And I just think that there may be promise here. I might be overstating it, but if you look at machine learning and artificial intelligence, and again, that's the new hey, AI, ML. Any problem, AI, ML. But if you look at it through the lens of okay, what am I trying to achieve? Cognitive overmatch against my enemy, right? That's what you're trying to achieve. So with cognitive overmatch, every human being, there's oh no, I can't remember the name of it. Something's brain in the fighter pilot. Mozart's brain in the fighter pilot, which is a great book. And it talks about how every human being, especially me at 62, has a certain cognitive load, like over a certain amount of information. I just can't handle any more information. I can't process it quickly enough. No matter how many New York Times puzzles you do, how many books you read to make your cognitive performance better, okay, you're just not going to get there. So how do you enhance cognitive processing. One way that I think is a dangerous way is through biology, which, the Chinese are looking at ways to do that, right? To improve cognitive and physical capability through biology. So, but the other one I want to focus on is really if you teamed with machines, and literally look at Kasparov's book Deep Thinking. He's really mad that he loses to IBM's Deep Blue, and he's like, hey, they cheated. The computer was rigged. But it's really, when he learns that it's not, he kind of goes, I'm really good. The machine's really good. But if the machine and I team together, we're pretty much going to be unstoppable. And that's where I'm going with future warfare is I think if we could find AI ML tools that, for the lack of a better term, were ergonomic, right? That fit well with human beings and literally with specific commanders, because every commander's kind of got a different way of doing things, their own, that recognitional decision-making foundation, over 30, 40 years of experience, like somebody like General Neller, 44 years. I mean, you learn a lot in that amount of time, and you can really apply it. But how do you tailor that and integrate it with the machine? And the thought experiment that we would always talk about when I was in the Marine Corps was if you took, you always got to talk about a dead German general, but there was a German general panzer commander, and the name will pop in my head in a second, but he was on the Eastern Front, and he's the only one in Stalingrad that actually did well, right? And he was outnumbered by a Russian corps like 20-1. And when they interviewed him after the war, they go, how did you know how to, do the things that you did? And he just said, well, I had an intuitive, I'm going to kill, I don't speak French, but coup de oui, in other words, an eye for the battle, an eye for the conflict. He had that. So if you took a guy like that and matched him up with a machine, I mean, you go from having an all-star player to, something that's even more capable. And I think we would have to, and I'm throwing a lot at this, but I think not only the machine integration with how we do decision making, but the education and training of people in uniform to understand how to best utilize those tools, and then have a working knowledge of all the different ways that we generate lethality and how we influence the cognitive process of the enemy, right? Because I think there's some misperceptions about the Chinese, and I am not an expert. I mean, I spent 2 years of my life really working it hard. I'm a little bit dated, but I would just say they're incredibly industrious people. You go to a place like Shanghai, you think, I'm an old guy, but you think you're in New York City in 1970. A lot going on, I mean, a lot of energy there. And you look at their accomplishments in terms of where they've taken, growing their middle class, the amount of infrastructure development. Now, the flip side is it could all be a Potemkin village. I'm mixing metaphors here. And, the whole thing might fall apart. But I do think there's some there to their capabilities. So to sit there and go, well, their military doesn't have combat experience, they don't think maneuver warfare like we do. You know what? They're good students. And I think that's the main, to end this part of it, I'd say that my main point would be they are fantastic imitators. And people criticize them for taking our stuff, copying it, and making it better. Well, if that was happening inside the United States, that would be called iteration and product development, right? Because you're taking something that's pretty good, you're iterating, making it even better. And if you're making it better, that reflects skill on your part. So I think we kind of look at that, well, they're cheating. No, we do the same thing, right? If they have a capability, hey, that's a great idea. That's a great platform. We'll take that and make it better. And I think that's one of their strong suits.
Mm-hmm.
So that was another long answer to a short question.
That's how we got the space, right?
Yeah. There you're from the Germans. Exactly.
Yeah. So there's a few things that I want to address, going back to, I think, a recurring theme with subject matter experts. Doesn't matter if they're a civilian or military person. It's the human dimension is always mentioned, and the emphasis of the human dimension. And I've brought this up a few times in other conversations, but when we look at the Air Force as an air power entity, and then even the Navy as well, we double down and focus on the technical dimension, if that's even a thing. But we focus on the technicalities of conflict, where you have the Army, you have the Marine Corps, which the Marine and the soldier is the weapon system. So naturally, you're going to lean into that that human dimension of warfare. Um, but as that connects to, maneuver warfare concepts, and I got my copy of MCPD-1, on my shelf here, and I think that's a progression that the Air Force is trying to transition to. If you look at AFDP-1, which in my opinion is a shorter version of MCPD-1, it's like 16 pages, and trying to make it easy to digest and understand, and
Yeah.
to inculcate mission command and those maneuver warfare concepts into what we do, as an air power entity. As we look at what a future conflict might look like, we have, as you said, all the buzzwords, right? AI, ML, we have autonomous vehicles that we're developing. We have, whether it's biologically enhanced human beings on the battlefield,
Yeah.
as you were alluding to. There are so many elements that are different now than they were then. But then there's going to be that fundamental, that core of conflict, which is that human domain. And when we
Yeah.
execute agile combat employment, and we are isolated and we are cut off, because naturally our command and control, our communications are going to be severed, and we're going to have airmen, soldiers, marines, sailors on the ground that are going to be without that direction. And that's where that maneuver warfare uh, perspective and doctrine, and embracing mission command, and commander's intent, is going to pay dividends. But we cannot continue to subordinate decisions to the health of aircraft. We need to subordinate decisions to the health of that airman, to that marine, and to that soldier.
Right.
And really think about how we interject into our adversary's cognitive domain, right? And then do that without the fancy tools and equipment, but do that because we are equipped with an understanding of the strategic perspective, and how we can execute independently on the battlefield. Those are just my thoughts on that.
No, that again, there's a lot there, and those were great comments. I'll go back to the maneuver warfare statement, and this is a matter of record, but when General Gray was the Second Marine Division commander, he came in, and the first thing he did is he made sure that every lieutenant and company grade and NCOs and staff NCOs had books. And when I first went to Second Tank Battalion, I said the Vietnam guys were fantastic. I mean, they were just such wonderful, motivating leaders. But if you said you read a book, people kind of looked at you sideways and said, "You're doing what? You're reading a book?" And General Gray, he changed that mindset for the Marine Corps, and it was very much grounded in maneuver warfare. And then when we used to go to Fort Pickett, and when I was a tanker, they would do hot washes, and he's a division commander. He would take the briefs on what occurred, during the exercise or that day. And I'll never forget. There's probably 600 people in the auditorium, right? I mean, 600. I mean, he just got everybody there, all the leadership, and he said, "Sergeant Williams, tell me your regimental commander's intent for this exercise." And the poor sergeant's like, "Sergeant does not know, but the sergeant will find out." And then he goes up the chain. When he gets to literally the battalion commander's got it, right? The company commander's not so much. But he did that. His point was that you really you got to believe it, right? You have to believe that, hey, if you're given commander's intent and access to the tools, again, I always say lethality, mobility tools, and logistics tools, you'll be able to execute in the absence of orders. But I think that the thing with maneuver warfare today is that there's always that friction between, hey, I'm going to have exquisite communications, and I'm going to be able to literally see everything. We got to worry about the overload of all the information, but that ability to really command and control all the way down the point, and think Vietnam, the commander in the helicopter, telling the folks on the ground what to do. And I just think that to maximize the tools that we have today, you're going to need, I mean, it's maneuver warfare, but you're really getting input from the pointy end on a gap or an area that you can exploit. But the rest of the machine behind that's got to be able to really gear up quick to provide the reinforcement that you need, either logistics, fires, whatever it is. And I think that the model would be is that from the Stingray teams in Vietnam, you can Google Stingray teams, but if I've got it right, they're like force reconnaissance teams on steroids that had access, to naval gunfire, to aviation fires, to artillery. Small teams inserted could see NVA or via column formations, and then calling those fires. And the only thing that bad was back then, lose comms, it's a bad day for the team, because they're greatly outnumbered. But I just think that principle of small teams in a dispersed environment, generating effects again through the access to all the different fires across the continuum, you'll be able to. It's maneuver warfare, but it's disciplined maneuver warfare, right? Because
Hmm.
and I say that knowing that you always can't predict or forecast what's going to happen on the pointy end, right? Because something catastrophic, can kind of throw the whole plan off. But I point to this as I just think there's always a friction between maneuver warfare and then the old style Soviet. Everybody's going to do exactly what I say, and the battle will unfold like this. And between the two, where are you? But I do think teaching mission command, the Army term, or maneuver warfare for the young ones is perfect and makes sense. It's just if you look at the threat environment, you're going to need a little bit of both, a little bit of centralization and a little bit of decentralization across the functions of warfare.
Hmm. I
So,
think Max Boot in War Made New talks about having an efficient bureaucracy. And
yeah,
that's the trick because you're going to need that hierarchy. You're going
yeah,
to need that a little bit of that structure. But how do we optimize that? How do
yeah.
we um, uh, how do we still seek the or take the benefits of having that bureaucratic system, which has that stability and that predictability and has that chain of command while also having and respecting the vast amount of free flowing information and being able to respond to the ever changing battle space.
And Matt, my concern is that, and you alluded to this earlier, is that if you look at the Prussian French model, right, of the what I call the, for lack of a better term, the functional linear staff. Okay, it's designed to get the troops and the trains to run on time. At the end of the day, I mean that's the genesis of it, and it does it very well in terms of movement. Maybe not outcome. I think the Schlieffen plan, right? But as you look to the future, it's like, okay, and this another sacred cow. It's easy for me to say this, but I was at Southcom for the Haiti earthquake relief, and what they had done there is they had transitioned the staff, and this I forgot I think it was Stabrice was the commander, who's absolutely brilliant. His book 2034 with Elliot Ackerman, very good. But I think he was trying to forecast and create a staff more for 21st century warfare, and to get away from that very linear stovepipe and kind of create to optimize it, through power combinations of different staff sections. I think where that falls short, I mean, I think it's a great idea, but the thing is that staff's got to plug into a higher joint staff. Then it's got to plug into its components and everybody lateral, higher, and support might not be the right word, but all levels. And if your machine is configured one way as a staff and it doesn't plug into the rest of the machine, then it's sub-optimized. That's a nice word for it's chaos because nobody knows who to literally call. I think that will what I think is needed is we had Goldwater Nichols to create the joint force, but I think we needed another Goldwater Nichols to kind of go, do we have the design right? I mean, is there a better way to train, organize for battle than the system that we have? Because as we all lived, there's really smart people and great people there. But what happens is you take really smart, great people and put them in billets that really don't have a lot of impact or really kind of malpositioned or outdated. You generate a lot of work, instead of having a very lean staff that can really fight that future battle.
Hmm. Yeah, I was listening to a podcast from War on the Rocks, and I forgot who the guest was. And they were talking about how we need the next Goldwater Nichols Act equivalent, right? Because we're long
Yeah,
overdue.
yeah,
And especially as we look at how the landscape has changed when it comes to the roots of innovation, right? When we're looking at,
Yeah,
we in the government essentially owned innovation. Like 80% of technical and technical growth or innovations came from the government. It came from the
yeah,
military,
right,
and now it's flipped upside down. Now, how do we, how do we optimize that? How do we tap into those resources, and not from a Chinese civil military fusion standpoint, and
right.
how do we discover the true potential of of all of our levers of power in the 21st century. So yeah, we're long overdue for that.
Yeah. And then, related to that is this is a little bit of a tangent, but bear with me. I mean, there's NSIN, there's DIU. I mean, a lot of smart, creative people out there, coming up with new initiatives and ideas. But everybody rants and raves about, what I call the Robert Strange McNamara PBE system, which worked, I guess, okay for Ford, but not the best model, for current capability development. So it's easy to always to criticize that system, but I would just say that, and I've met very few because they're almost like the key maker in Matrix. They're a unicorn. There's just not a lot of them. But there's certain people that understand. I think Hondo Gertz and Will Roper are two of them that understand how to make, even though it's slow, even though it's bureaucratic, even though it's frustrating, they know how to make that system move. Now, it doesn't move fast, but it moves and it actually creates product at the end of the day. So, my point to this is I think if we spent less time criticizing that system and just finding the key makers, right, that can make it work, there's a way to get money, there's a way to, and again, it's a very bureaucratic and process layered system. I just think there's folks that understand kind of how to turn the right dials to get you where you need to go. And
Hmm.
I think the thing is that, in my opinion, we tend to create wonderful high end systems. I mean, going back, I was an M60A1 tanker when the M1 first came out. So if you look at the M1, you look at the F-35, I mean, you look at our aircraft carriers. I mean, these are the model mechanical, just optimization and just fantastic platforms. Don't talk about vulnerability, but they're great platforms. But I think now, as we're looking to future war, there might be other systems, especially in the unmanned realm, which I think that's the future. I think manned aviation, I mean, you're always going to, I think, have manned to a degree aviation, but, lead follower or, manned aircraft, unmanned aircraft times two. These are the new systems that for less money will provide just as much, if not more punch. I mean, they're not the end all, but just, like if you watch the Super Bowl and you watch the thousands, not thousands, that's an exaggeration, hundreds of drones flying around. I mean, think about the lethality you could generate in a littoral environment if you literally had unmanned vessels that you're not really, and they could be wooden. You don't care if you lose it. They have hundreds of drones, and you can launch those drones, and they're either a seer or a shooter or a log carrier or a relay. I mean, they have all this potential. I think, if you remember the movie, and I'm dating myself, you wouldn't have seen this movie, The Graduate, but Dustin Hoffman, it's plastics, it's plastics. I mean, that's the future. I think the future, especially in logistics realm, is going to be on the unmanned side and for lethal effects. So I just think those platforms, and I'm not saying the Ukraine model is the model completely for the future, but we're seeing it's kind of insights. It's like in the Civil War at the very, very end when you're seeing the Gatling gun and kind of going, I'm like, there's some potential in that thing. I'm not sure how. It's the same thing here. You're looking at unmanned going, there's a lot of there potentially in the future. Over to you. Sorry.
No, no, that was great. I think we saw the roots of that even before the conflict in Ukraine, but in Azerbaijan, right?
Yeah. Right.
Looking at
Yep.
the utilization of unmanned vehicles, and then now I think it's incredible. You just scroll through Instagram and you see all this footage from the front,
Yes.
and I saw this shot or the screen capture of a drone, little guy, flew right over a tank, dropped a grenade, boom,
Yeah.
right? That's incredible.
Yeah.
And the drone got caught up in the explosion, and so essentially it self-destructed, but that tank cost a lot more than
Yes.
that tiny little drone. And
Yes.
I think and then you touched on using unmanned vehicles for sustainment, right? I mean, I think
Yeah.
that's also something that I'm sure in the corners of the Pentagon is being discussed, and but it's just interesting to see how all that kind of plays out and comes to
Yeah.
fruition.
One thing, John Miller, General Berger, both, and your comments before, but you said this before, but at the end of the day, what matters most, talking Marine Corps, is that individual Marine at the very pointy end, and you literally you reverse engineer everything to make him the most lethal and capable warfighting entity possible. So that's from the weapon he's carrying, the communications that he has, to the light, to the SAPI plate light as possible, to the batteries as small as possible and long lasting. Because it's the I saw you're a Patriots fan, no offense, but I'm a Bills fan. But Belichick, so it's the game of inches. And I just think there's a lot of little things that you in that reverse engineering of outfitting, man, train, and equip a Marine at the pointy end, that gets lost, because there's the intangibles or really intangibles of, we make Marines, they're motivated, they'll take any hill, and we're giving them the best rifle, the best ammo, the best batteries, the best comms. And that way, at the very pointy end, you're optimized. I mean, you're a killing machine at the pointy end. Then everything you make left of boom, it's tailored to support not only the Marine, but obviously the different formations as quickly as possible. And I think, that a lot of people get wrapped around, oh, we lost this system, we don't have this anymore. But you've got the individual Marine, and then you're creating, for lack of a better term, to me, alignment and symmetry of all the different capabilities that are in support of that Marine, either on his body or from a phone, from a radio call or a data call, so to speak, that hey, I need this effect here, help me out.
Hmm.
Food for thought.
Yeah, and I think Mars Syscom is doing a fantastic job of equipping the individual Marine.
Yeah,
But I also I think the commandant's reading list makes Marines just as lethal, right? Yeah, in
right.
its own way, and encourage everybody does to look at that reading list and look at your respective service chiefs reading list, and because it's there for a reason, right?
Yeah,
And it's there
yes.
to make you a more lethal asset, and so you can dominate your cognitive domain.
And related to that, one thing that it's just it's irritating to me is in my work and my life outside, the Marine Corps. People always want to talk to the general, right? Well, talk to the general, and to me, it's like, hey, talk to the corporal. Okay, talk to the sergeant. I mean, because if you, and this is what we did. Not my idea; it was the team's idea. When I was in installation logistics, the team said, okay, hey, let's get all the young ones across the Marine Corps together for an innovation symposium. And we did that out in California. And the ideas that they come up with, because here's the good news. Not really good. Good news is I did 37 years in the Marine Corps. It's good news for me because I really enjoyed it. The bad news is, though, I did 37 years in the Marine Corps. What I mean by that is I'm, no matter what, going to have certain baked in ideas that I'm not going to let go, right? Even if I try to be as innovative and flexible as possible, it's going to be like, hey, I saw that 6 times before, so that's not going to work. And what the young corporals and sergeants would tell me is, hey, it didn't work 6 or 7 times before, but the conditions weren't right. It's going to work today, and here's why. I mean, that's why you need, anytime I think with an innovation group, you need different kinds of people, different age, gender, ethnicity, background. Because if you have a bunch of guys that look like me, you're going to get kind of this kind of answer. Where if you bring together very diverse, what I call crazy, and I mean this in a good way, crazy thinkers, the young ones they'll come up with things. You sit there and go, how did they figure that out? I think we need to do more of that.
And I love how you bring that up because that's exactly what Tesseract is getting after.
Yeah.
Is because I mean, I told you I came onto the staff as an E3, and then we've had every rank represented from E3 all the way up to O5, to bring together those perspectives and to connect with the field level. What? So we've talked a lot about the future warfare. We've talked about everything from AI, autonomous vehicles. We've talked about, but most importantly, we've talked about the human dimension of war and what the joint force can do to equip themselves, and and so much more. What has come to mind throughout this podcast that you would like to end with here, and what would you like to leave the audience with?
Yeah. I think what I'd like to touch on is, General Berger's Force Design 2030 initiative. I firmly believe he's got more right than wrong. I mean, I think there's some really good ideas in that. I think some of the concern is that, if those that are critical of it, I respect their opinion. These are war fighters and tons of experience, brilliant men. But I would say that look at how we're going to generate effects on the future battlefield. And if you were a World War II, Korea, Vietnam, and for that matter, in Afghanistan and Iraq, you're throwing a lot of lead at the problem. I mean, there's a lot of mass, and that's how you're creating those effects. But look at it, and I'm always going to be grounded in reality. But look at a future battlefield where there's other ways to leverage effects across the weapons spectrum. Okay, from kinetic to non-kinetic. I mean, the entire spectrum. And again, it's that power in combinations. Are there ways to combine those that generate orders of magnitude greater impact on the battlefield? And again, at the end of the day, it's always that battle between a lot of mass, a lot of weight, survivability, to lighter, faster, more nimble, responsive, and you can project fires quickly. So there's always that rub. But I just think that, through experimentation, the folks in Quantico are, doing their best to say, okay, this was the concept that the commandant laid out. Let's fine tune it. I think it needs some fine tuning. I think on the logistics side, we really need to think it through because again, it's a blend of old and new. But I would say that don't get so fixated on the platform, one platform, if it happens to have been, and I'm a tanker, so those went away. So it's like, that's the end of that, my MOS for me. But think more about, okay, how can I better combine new capabilities with old to generate the effects? And I understand it's a physics problem at the end of the day to a large degree. I mean, you need X amount of aircraft, rotary wing, fixed wing, from Marine Corps to Air Force to, Transcom, everything in between to project power. I'm just recommending that, spend more time thinking about the solutions and how we can best tailor that force to get the optimal effect that you're trying to achieve. So again, some folks don't like the fact that tanks got it. But hey, if you look at the modern battlefield, how can we make this work? And I'll throw this out. Let's say if you're looking for a new armored reconnaissance vehicle, right? Okay, make one manned, whatever company you go with, make one manned, make 6 unmanned, 4, right? And there's other ways to create reconnaissance, fires, mobility. There's different ways to put it together. And I think if we spent more time thinking about that, it would be helpful to the Marine Corps.
General Dana, thank you so much
Yeah.
for coming on and sharing your insights and your perspective. And I think that our Air Force audience here has, so much to learn, from the force design effort. I've talked about Force Design 2030 and many podcasts, just because I think they're the only Accelerate, Change, or Lose and Force Design 2030, I believe, are the only two really overt change management at the organizational level initiatives going on within the DoD. And I think it helps that General Brown and General Berger are on the same page. But it's cool to see both of our branches growing almost congruently in ways that they never have before. Because when you think of the Air Force and the Marine Corps, you think of black, you think of white, you think of like opposites, which they are in many ways. But I think we are converging in thought of how we need to execute the future fight.
Well, Matt, thanks for having me on today. Really appreciate it. Loved hearing about your grandfather. And again, I love your library and everything you got. And I look forward to continued discussion with you. So thanks a lot. Appreciate
Thank you,
it.
sir.
Tower, this is Eagle 1. Requesting a flyby. Negative, Eagle 1. The pattern is full.
Thank you again for listening to Tesseract Podcast. Make sure you follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and connect with us on LinkedIn. Any references to trademarked, copyrighted, or protected products or services such as books, movies, or businesses are used here for the limited purpose of education and professional development of Air Force Airmen. If you have any questions, please contact us at www.tesseract.af.mil.